Hello and welcome to the EMS Handoff Podcast. This is David, and along with my co-host, Eric McCullough and Bradley Dean, we are your source for all things EMS. Tonight, going with our trend, distinguished is out, retiring is in, celebrating a career of a good man. Good man. That goes along with distinguished, doesn't it, Bradley? I don't think goes. We'll have to see how this goes over the next hour. But you all are going to recognize him. Almost certain. If you've been around this profession for anything longer than a couple days, you know this name. But before we do, I always like to see how my co-host week have gone. I like to say I just got off the lake and definitely needed the couple hours we had a chance to get out there to recharge and relax. So, Eric McCullough, what have you been doing, brother?
Just dealing with kids in the heat, and pretty much just we got our garden that came in. So again, got all the garlic and fun stuff out. So all the kids they're also learning that mosquitoes are completely indiscriminate about how often they will get you and where they will get you. That's been a surprise to them too.
That's very much so. I think we could do an episode just on mosquitoes. That's bad. How about over in North Carolina, Bradley Dean?
Man, it's been nice, warm, and muggy, but the bugs are out over here as well, and mosquitoes will get you in some inconspicuous places.
It's like, how do they even make it? We're not going. That takes us off the trail too much tonight. So
there's a reason I go inside to use the bathroom.
Very. All right. Before we introduce tonight's guest, we'd like to thank our podcast partner, the Journal of Emergency Medical Services. They've been a tremendous partner to the EMS Handoff Podcast since rebooting to this new format. Make sure to go by and take a look at their website, GEMS.com. And while we remain your source for all things EMS in the podcast verse, GEMS has been an industry leader for many years. On their website, you can also take a look at all the other podcast hosts that they have out there, but mainly go by and just check out our episodes. We love those other guys, but you really like us, so just hang out with us. You can tell them it's all right. We tell them too. So they do the same thing to us. Don't forget to also go by the Pursuit Company and check out the EMS Handoff Podcast clothing line. We have our originals plus our new Keep Back 500 Feet podcast line, most recent edition that's out there, wearing it today myself. But you need to go to thepursuitco.com/EMS Handoff, and you find all of our cool gear there, a couple different colors like the red, the one that looks like our duty shirt here, all good stuff. Bradley Dean, enough suspense. This podcast is coming out on his last day. So we're going to take all of that knowledge. Let's introduce our guest.
So tonight we've got Doug Smith. He's a co-founder of Platinum Educational Group. He's a licensed paramedic and instructor coordinator in the state of Michigan, and has been involved in EMS for 30 years. He has a master's degree in education, has taught numerous instructor courses. He's also spoken at numerous state and national conferences. Doug, thank you for joining us tonight, and welcome to the EMS Handoff Podcast.
My pleasure. Thanks for having us.
All right. So as we were talking about in our little intro before we ever got started, you were mentioning that Wednesday, when our podcast comes out, is your very last day. And I told you one thing. I said, just take the next hour and dump all of your knowledge into every single one of our listeners that we've got coming on. So, Doug, again, welcome. So what brought you into the EMS profession?
So I started as a math and science teacher at a high school level. So I went to Michigan State University, graduated in '78 with a degree in education and a secondary degree in mathematics, and worked a few schools. Ended up in Paradise, Michigan, which is a little tiny town up in the corner there. Right, its claim to fame is the Edmund Fitzgerald Museum is there. So the wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald, people might be aware of. It's right off of Lake Superior, a very remote area. The closest hospital is 45 minutes away. The next closest is an hour. That's on good roads. I've had it where it took us 6 hours to get to the hospital just because the roads were that bad. I had a call one time as a snowmobiler that had decided to attack an iceberg and lost, but he didn't die. He just was mangled significantly, and it was right at the winter, or the spring thaw. So the trails were breaking up, the packed snow was breaking up. So the call took about 20 hours from dispatch to delivery to the hospital. Just that took that long to go in and get him by snowmobile, pull him back out, put him in the rig, and try to get to the hospital. So you certainly learn your patient when you have 20 hours, of which about 16 of that was spent with them. When after that, and that was just a volunteer service. Because I was the math teacher, they also thought maybe I should teach gym. The gym program, I don't understand it either. The gym program had a CPR portion to it. And a gal there came in and taught CPR and said, you'll be taking the CPR course with us, right? Now, she was also the director of the EMS agency at the time. Well, the science background I had was the physical sciences, not the biological sciences. And I was not all that excited about joining an EMS agency. So I said, well, I'll watch. And she said, no, you need to be a good role model for the kids. All right. So I'll learn the CPR. I'll do the CPR. But when it comes to the written test, you're not going to certify me. I'm going to intentionally fail that test. And it was a 50 question. It was back when CPR tests were true false. So this would have been in 1980. And I failed that test beautifully. She said I got one right, but I proved to her that, nope, that one was wrong too. I showed her where it was incorrect. As I knew her method was, she was going to get me that CPR card. And then she was going to say, well, now that you have that, it's only a logical conclusion that you join the ambulance service, which was manned by either the park rangers or the teachers in the area. That was who manned that service. So I learned the material, but didn't get certified. Then there were 3 strikes. God knocked on my door 3 times. So the first, I was out at a lake in the summertime with my niece and nephew. One of my high school students decided to kiss a tree with his face while riding a motorcycle. Mr. Smith, there's been a terrible accident. The assumption being a teacher, I would know what to do. He had a big towel up on his face. I said, well, why don't you take that down? And you could see his skull and his forehead. His upper lip was down around his chin. His nose was dangling. I said, why don't you put that back up? I've heard direct pressure is good, as I'm starting to pass out. And there were no phones. It was well before cell phones, but there weren't even any phones around there. So loaded him up in my car and took him to the nearest phone, called an ambulance, and they came and took him away. It was a basic service. That was all they had there. Then strike 2 was one of my high school students' parents rolled his truck right in front of my house. The neighbor kid came over, Mr. Smith, terrible accident in front of the house. Can you come over and help? I said, well, what do you need? He said, well, we need a flashlight. I said, well, I can give you one of those. He said, well, can you operate it for us? So fine. So I came out there, and here's this truck, all 4 in the air. The guy's in the cab, kind of flattened. I said, where are your kids? Because 2 of his kids, twin boys, were high school students of mine. I said, where are your kids? He said, they're under me. Well, there was no room for anybody to be under him. So I said, well, don't move. I've heard that trauma victims should stay still. Now, that wasn't the real reason. The real reason was I didn't want the visual of these 2 high school students kind of smeared into the pavement. So he moved anyhow, being drunk that he was. But he was so drunk that he had forgotten that he had left the kids back at the last bar. So there were no kids at all, just him. Yay. And then the 3rd strike, I was building a house with my wife, and our little 1-year-old son had found a pop-out out of an outlet box. Swallowed it, turned blue, and my wife screamed. She didn't know what to do. I looked down, and there was this Smurf standing next to my wife. And I jumped off the ladder I was working on and cleared his airway as a result of that CPR class that I didn't want to take, and cleared his airway. And afterwards thought, whoa, my kid almost died. Would have died, because we were 15 minutes away from the nearest phone to have called the ambulance that would have been 30 minutes away. So it was 45 minutes before anybody would have been there. He was already turning blue, so he would not have made it. It's like, okay, God, I will learn this stuff. Quit threatening my family. So it's with that kind of passion that I've approached EMS. It never was a job for me. It never was a way to just put bread on the table. It started off in Paradise, Michigan, population 300, K-12 school of 80 kids. And most of those calls involved people that I knew. You get tourists that come in the summertime, but most of the time they were your friends, your neighbors, your family. That's who you ran on. And it was a basic service. And so you were limited as to what you could do, but you were grateful to be able to do anything. And the concept of being an ambulance driver was offensive. You did more than just drive the ambulance. You treated as best you could. And we got the service up to the intermediate or specialist level is what we called it in Michigan. It would be the equivalent of the I-85 nationally. But the I-85 historically means nothing because there was no real consistency to it nationally. But basically you can intubate in IVs was all you could do. But there were calls that we had that would have made the difference. Again, when you're 45 minutes to an hour away, a paramedic service would have been nice. There was no air medical. You just had a long drive to the hospital. The Coast Guard would come out if it was a water rescue thing, but otherwise, there wasn't enough business and the weather was too terrible most of the time for a private air ambulance to operate in the area. So it was just a basic service. It is still only an intermediate service. It is not a paramedic service. Moved from there to Marquette. So I retired from public school teaching after about 10 years. And I'd been teaching for a while. So was doing both teaching and EMS. Taught at a couple of colleges in the area and some of the what we called out county courses just for the other volunteers. We got a job as a regional coordinator for the state of Michigan and the Upper Peninsula. So that was my territory, was working with ambulance agencies for inspections, putting on state tests. That was before the National Registry came to Michigan, and we did our own state testing. And did that for 5 years. The Upper Peninsula, by the way, of Michigan is 60 miles longer than the Lower Peninsula is tall. And the state of Michigan, in their infinite wisdom, thought that January, February, and March in the Upper Peninsula would be the perfect time to go out and inspect ambulances, where it wasn't uncommon for 2 to 3 foot of snow to fall. So that was sometimes harrowing, but a great group of folks up there, and just it was a blast doing that. And also worked at Marquette General Hospital in EMS. I got my paramedic license up there. So I had my specialist or intermediate, and I was actually the lead instructor of my intermediate. I had because there were no other intermediate instructors in the area. So I co-taught with an instructor and another and the physician director, a guy named Dr. Ludwig. Moved to Marquette, got my paramedic through a gal named Venetia Briers in Escanaba, Michigan, Rampart EMS agency. For those of you historians, Rampart should mean something to you. And so worked with Venetia, got my paramedic license, worked at Marquette General Hospital while doing the state stuff. And what a difference, boy, from having a patient no less than 40, we never had a patient less than 45 minutes in Paradise. Whereas Marquette, you never had a patient more than 15 to 20 minutes. So it's like, geez, we barely get to know the patient. We barely get to do all the procedures we're supposed to do before we're at the hospital. What was nice is there were only about 6 or 7 paramedics that worked the service. There were only 5 docs that worked there. So all the paramedics knew all the docs knew all the paramedics. So you never called for permission to do anything. You just treated the patient. And if you had a question, you could call them up and say, hey, I got a question. What do you think we should do here? Or they took this. What do I do? What do I do now? And usually they go just a minute while they researched it or went online to try to figure out what you do with something like that. Then they call us up and say, well, why don't you consider this? Or we don't know either. Just bring them in and we'll figure it out together. But But it was great service. Once you delivered them, you got to work the emergency department with them. We were the code team in the hospital. So when there was a code, they dispatched the paramedics unless we were out on a call. So it was really an awesome opportunity. Then did that for about 5 years. Moved to Grand Rapids, Michigan. And in Grand Rapids, it was through Kent County Medical Control and Butterworth AeroMed. And I was just the educator for the medical control, and AeroMed was doing ACLS and PALS courses in the area. So we went off and taught those, as well as they handled all the resident training when they came in July. Learned a tremendous amount of stuff, had a blast. But again, also worked AMR, although it was pre-AMR, it was Mercy Ambulance and then MedTrans. And the call time went from 15 minutes, which seemed really short, to about 5 minutes. Like, whoosh, I barely have time to get the call in, let alone do any of the other stuff. But there was a huge change in attitude, I think, too. So you started off in EMS, in the volunteer service, where you really cared about the people you were treating because you knew them. They were your family, they were your friends. To then go to an urban setting where you hardly ever knew anybody. And it was just a job for most everyone. And they didn't recognize the impact maybe that they had. So that was kind of challenging to see. But I have gotten an opportunity to see EMS from a bunch of different viewpoints. So that's been fun.
KMG 365, by the way.
There you go.
we caught it. All three of us, I think, flashed those eyes as soon as you mentioned it. So, talking about spanning such a great history, we're going to go into your education side as well, because I really want to see that engagement. You kind of brought it up there just in your entry history, talking about being in that small rural area to the urban area and the change and being able to know people. So what brought you to the education side, other than your background, as far as wanting to get into teaching the next generation of the EMS side, and subsequently your role then in the development of Platinum?
Yeah, so being a high school math and science teacher, it kind of made sense that I would go into teaching EMS as well as providing. So about a year after I'd started, they actually encouraged me to get my instructor coordinator license. Normally you had to wait a number of years, but they said, because you already have the degree in teaching, how about we just skip some of those years and you take on that role. So I attended an instructor course the state put on, and taught at Lake Superior State University they were a college at the time. And it was the EMT program was part of the nursing curriculum, but no nurse ever took the course. It was actually the criminal justice majors that took the course because they were required to, but they weren't required to get licensed. They were required to take the course and get the knowledge, but they did not want them to have necessarily the certification and the responsibility or liability of EMTs. So pass rates, if you were to look at your recruitment, retention, and how many successfully completed testing, that program would be miserable, because most of those students that started, most of them completed, but they never went on to do the registry because that wasn't what was intended. So if that was the measuring tool you were going to use for a successful program, it was dismal. So to teach people EMS, to just teach them EMS so they're knowledgeable providers, does not seem to be the focus as far as the registry or COA is concerned. It's more of, you got to get through that registry test to be, quote, successful. But interesting program. And as an IC, you actually carried the license for that program. The college didn't, you carried it. So the authority to offer that course was with you. And so being a college, they always wanted to do a lot more for less revenue or less expenditure. So, hey, you got 30 kids in there, and we're going to give you one lab assistant, and you got a couple of backboards and a couple of this, and that should do you plenty well. It's like, no, for 30 kids, I really need 4 other assistants, and I need a lot more backboards. And the gal May Markstrom was her name, said, no, we're not going to do that. And so my response was, fine, then I guess I'll just take my IC license and you can see if you can find someone else to offer your program, but your program will no longer be approved. And it was that ability to, well, strong arm somebody to say, okay, and we got our lab assistants and we got our equipment, and the size of the program went from 30 to 60 and is now a very successful paramedic program up there. But again, in the infinite wisdom of everybody, we don't want individuals running these. We want universities. If universities ran things, then education would be much better. Clearly, no good, competent EMS people could come from a fire station or from an EMS garage. It has to be through a college. They're the only people that know how to offer good education. Now, I haven't necessarily seen that to be true in my career. I've seen great programs that happen through colleges, and I've seen dismal programs that happen through colleges, and I've seen great programs that are offered by individuals, and I've seen dismal programs that are offered by individuals. So just to say, well, this will be the solution, I don't think is necessarily true. But that seems to be the way everybody's gone. And if every paramedic had a college degree, or at least an associate's degree, then our pay would increase tremendously, because we get paid just like the nurses, because we'd be educated just like the nurses. And won't that be wonderful? And if we create a bit of a shortage, then they'll pay us even more, because we'll be in such demand. Well, I think we could all agree that hasn't played out either.
Well, and I think you make a really good point, because having that conversation quite a bit here frequently, we're talking about a much different time. When the nursing staff decided to do that, it was at a point in time in which healthcare was growing with an abundance of money, and that it was just in a different spot. And now when we take a look at it, we have kind of lost that focus as healthcare has turned to the business of healthcare, and several of those plans that they were able to get funded many years ago would not be. In some of your material that you sent over, I found it quite interesting, going from the textbook that you had to the textbooks that are offered now.
Yeah. So so I had the 3rd edition AAOS text, the orange book. They had just come out with that. So the class before me had the 2nd edition AAOS text. And all of my instructors had operated either on the 1st edition AAOS text or pre-AAOS text at all. One of the guys that we knew had his job, he was an interesting guy, a guy named Bob Marshall. His job was to break into Strategic Air Command bases and attempt to capture the colonel or the person in charge of that airbase. So he tested security, and he was good at it. And the other thing he was fascinating at is acquiring equipment. So we trained on all military surplus stuff. So everything we had was that drab olive green, and it was fascinating. But you learned a lot. You learned a lot of the principles, because you didn't have to. I learned before the Sager, and in fact, the hair. I think it just come out, but we used the Thomas Halfring. Was what we trained on, and also here's two padded board splints. Here's some cravats and a Spanish windlass. Go at it. So you learn the principles. So it's always fascinating when you have a kid say, "Well, I only know how to use the Sager, or I only know how to use the Kendrick's traction splints." Like, then you don't understand the principles of traction splinting. And I think that's what we've gotten away from. We've gotten into techniques and kind of lost sight of principles. What's the principles of what we're supposed to be doing? And I know the books are titled The Principles of Providing, but it doesn't seem like anybody's focused on that. They're all focused on, how do I pass the test?
Well, and coming from an educator, that's it's quite interesting because we've actually had students come in and like, why do I need to know all this? I just need to know what I need to know to pass a test.
Right.
And it's like, that's not what we're here for. And I've said this, and you know, I would speak for Eric as well. You know, both of us are very similar, and it's like, if we teach you how to treat the patients out in the field, you're prepared to take the test.
That's right. Yeah, that's exactly
And
right.
And so let's go real quick into. Go ahead, Eric. I'll let you.
Oh, nothing. I was just saying that I think that's the frustrating part. Now, me being on the other end of the other side of education, outside the college now and in the clinical setting, man, that attitude does not go away. That whole pass the test, like, what do I need to pass this test and check this box? We've almost converted healthcare into an industry, like a conveyor belt. You know, it's like, it doesn't matter, just get the stamp of approval so that we can go on to the next phase. So yeah, that's all I wanted to say. I had to say that in there.
No, absolutely.
Well, and it's one of those, like, you know, a lot of people, the key thing when they look at continuing education, especially at the paramedic level, I have to get my CPR, ACLS, PALS, my trauma card, whether it's PHTLS, ITLS, or something of that. And that covers, and then I have to get a pediatric class because most places are going, but you have to have some sort of pediatric aspect as well. And you know, I've long said, if you talk about some of these sessions like this, you know, CPR only gets updated every 5 years. And so theoretically, you could get it, your last class, at the very last date that material is implemented. And so you don't have to recertify for another 2 years. And so you're going off medical data that's 7 years old.
Right.
And not. So Doug, I want to kind of change because I think you have a lot of unique perspectives coming from your current role. So let's go ahead and transition coming into the platinum side and developing education.
So Tom Gottschalk was my business partner when we started this. He's the co-founder. And these two dudes in 2002 said, hey, we should help the teachers teach. We had worked for a company called the Cook Institute, whose motto was to help the healers heal. And we worked with residents and medical students, PA students and whatnot, in whatever, and it really was, your mission was help the healers heal, whatever it takes to make them better healers, make them better physicians, make them better whatever. So we said we should apply that towards EMS education. And it was at that time that the Michigan was looking to go to the National Registry and had just gone. And our pass rates were dismal, which surprised folks. They kept saying, well, you know, we're Michigan. We're a peninsular state. Clearly, we know things that they don't. Well, we had difficult tests, but they were difficult for the wrong reason. I remember the first test I looked at was probably the worst test I've ever seen. So this was something we had done for a company. And this guy said, well, take a look at my test. And there was a matching question that was 7 pages long. So the answer to one of the matching things could be on 7 pages later. Now, is that a difficult test? Yes, but for the wrong reason. You know, it's difficult because of its setup. It wasn't difficult because of it was all low-level questions that were just psychotically written. And so we spent the weekend with the gentleman writing our what turned out to be our basic EMT final exam. And that test proved to be a good measure of whether you'd be successful at the registry. And what we were looking to do is to help people write higher balloon level questions that dealt more with what are you going to do when you get there, not can you rattle off this definition or what's on page 12 of your book, who cares? So we created that. Then we created a paramedic exam with another company and with their help, and then first responder exams. And just that first guy said, hey, could you create a test bank for my quizzes, or could you create quizzes for me? It's like, no, but we can create a test bank. So I think now the test bank has 4,500 questions at least, and has been answered over 120 million times. So it's a pretty validated test bank.
I'd say me and David Blevin students probably count for, what would you say, about a couple million of those?
Yeah, you guys been using it for a while. And it's
for just us personally, and then we got students. You know, that's different.
Yeah.
Perfect. It's been a positive and a negative. The positive has been, we really try to write difficult questions. That's our, we try to come up with as many great wrong answers as we can versus, what's the answer to this, this medication, and then apple, orange, and banana. They're good quality questions. They're mean. They're logically, well, I could see if you'd maybe been trained 10 years ago or 5 years ago, that used to be the right answer 5 years ago, but it's not the right answer anymore. You got to stay current. Well, it used to be right, but they'll say, well, it needs to be in my book. I can't answer it if it's not in my book. It has, what page number? There was a fire department out west that said, hi, we can't use you because you can't reference all of your answers to the textbook. And my response was, okay, in your textbook, tell me where it describes what you're supposed to do with a patient who has all of these medical conditions who ends up getting into an accident. That's not in there. What do you do for that patient? What should you expect to find on a patient who just got schmucked, who takes tons of beta blockers? You can't tell me what their heart rate's going to be because that's not in your book. Are you telling me that patient doesn't exist, or all your patients have to read the book before they get there? You have to know the principles. But students want to know where they can find it in their book, and students want to know, just let me memorize the test. Tell me what all the answers are, and then I'll be successful. Well, you might pass the registry if the registry uses our test bank, which they don't. But even if you could, the fact you memorized all these questions doesn't make you a good provider. Those aren't the same. Again, as you said, if you learn to do the stuff, you're going to pass the test. If you memorize the test, that you're worthless to most anybody. You passed, my God, that's too bad. Now you're licensed. Now you're responsible for information you don't really have. There was an interesting study that unintentionally happened. A program in one of the Midwestern states, their students took thousands of adaptive tests, and they just memorized all the answers. And then the instructor gave them a final exam based on the same bank of questions that our adaptive questions come from. And miracle of miracles, they passed both. And then they all went on to take the registry, and every one of them failed. So they passed all these tests because they memorized the answers, but they didn't pass the registry because they didn't learn this stuff. Learn this stuff. Learn the objectives. And it's a shame that we got rid of the EMS educational objectives and instead had the EMS standards, the educational standards, which is an oxymoron. They're neither educational nor standard. They're all defined by whoever wants to define them. Well, what does an EMT need to know about head injuries? Well, they need to know more than a first responder, but less than an intermediate. Well, that doesn't say anything. Do they need to know coup contra coup? Well, you decide that as an educator. Okay, well, do we have a national standard? Well, yeah, it's the educational standards, and it says you're supposed to know something about head injuries. It's how am I supposed to teach this? We've set it up so that everybody kind of is. It used to be that way, by the way. If you wanted to pass the test, the National Registry test was based on the AAOS book. You memorize the AAOS book, you pass the National Registry. That's the way it was 30 years ago. We got away from that, but it seems like we're going back there again.
And one of the things I think you bring up a very good conversation point there that I jump in. It's a conversation we've had within our college as well, and not just in EMS. We've gone into some of the others disciplines, and you'll have 3 or 4 professors that teach there, and everybody knows who that hard professor is. Mm-hmm. The one that basically, if you're planning on going into that profession, like that's the person that you want. And then you've got the professor that if you just need to get through it, you're going to take. And then you have individuals steering people that, oh, you don't want to take such and such class. He's a hard person,
Right.
or, if you just want to get through. And so that's what we see, as well as if you have some of these programs that are out there that are looking to increase your capabilities, because as you said, nobody ever truly fits in one category.
Yeah.
You go by some of these books, and we've got respiratory emergencies, and we block out a choking and a COPD and asthma, etc. And everything is built around that. And the idea is to give you that knowledge so that if you have somebody that has COPD that's been involved with a trauma and there's chest injuries, what all may be involved and how they tie together. But yet we know that when we build that and make it a little bit more difficult, that then the people talk is like, oh, that they are hard, and they don't give you the answers to the test. Let's go over here.
Right. So you get your easy ticket punch. And maybe you got lucky in passing the test. Maybe you don't know it, but you got lucky and passed. Well, this person's going to be taking care of my wife, my kids, my grandkids. I don't want somebody that got lucky. I don't want a pilot that got lucky and passed their pilot's test. I want you to know how to fly the plane. And I want you to know how to fly the plane, not in textbook perfect conditions. I want you to know how to fly the plane when everything's gone bad.
And that's a good point, because not to interrupt, I was just going to say, you're talking about somebody having, that they didn't just get lucky and pass. When I took this test a couple years ago, both of the EMT, AMT, and paramedic, I was astonished. It is base level. This is entry level stuff. So, these people aren't even, I know there's a lot of criticism to the National Registry exam, and some of it probably is fair. Some of it probably isn't, but I do like that there's at least some sort of standardized thing out there that keeps the gates from being open to just everybody, because I'm just like, it is an entry level standard for people to pass. And I'm with you. Even if you do pass the registry, I would dare say you still need some training especially before you're a paramedic. Now, just like a pilot. Yeah. You don't want to just throw them out there.
You're licensed to learn. That's what the National Registry test should be, is you are now licensed or certified or registered to learn. You're not done. That's nice. You finished your program. There is no way I can prepare you for everything you're going to see. I can't expose you to all the different calls you're going to see. So,
well, you take a look at physicians and their physician education programs that are out there.
Yeah.
When they come out, whether it's they're a cardiothoracic surgeon, a trauma surgeon, cardiologist, neurologist, or even just an ED doc, they're going to get into situations that they have no clue. Right. And they have been through 4 to 7 years worth of education just in the medical side alone. They know the body, they know how it works. They can tell you how every little thing passes from one part of the body to the next. And yet when they first come out, they're leaning on those attendings. They're tied to somebody.
That's right.
They've been through their internships. They come out for their residencies before they ever go. So
we take paramedics. So you went to this program. You're minimally competent entry level paramedic. You're going to go through some sort of FTO program that might be extensive, but given the shortages and how much the agencies need meat in the seat, that seems to be getting shorter and shorter. And okay, now you're in charge. And it used to be you weren't, as a paramedic, you wouldn't be working with a basic EMT. You'd be working with another paramedic at a lot of the inner city agencies. It'd be a medic truck. But due to the shortages now, we're medic basic. So you're in charge. And so you went through this training program. Now, who are you going to learn from as a paramedic who's been out on the streets for 6 months with a basic EMT partner who's maybe been out on the streets for 6 months? So that's where a lot of our challenge is we have not, and COVID did us no favors.
Right.
It beat the snot, and then the educational part took a massive hit during that time. It clearly showed that just doing education online is not the answer for everyone. That it did prove. It works well for some and doesn't work well for others. We saw that in K-12 schools, colleges, and whatnot. It's nice. It's a nice alternative. It certainly was something that you could do, but you don't get the hands-on stuff at all. In Florida, the nursing programs there, these nurses graduating out of the COVID programs have never touched a patient. They've never touched a utensil. They've never touched a piece of equipment. They were not allowed to come in. So nurses already eat their young when they start. Here's nurses that are going to come out that have never touched anything. These senior nurses who have been abused for the past year with COVID and working like crazy are just, why are you here? I don't have time to teach you. I don't even have time to do my own job, let alone teach you how to do this job. So we keep trying to find the shortcut way to produce a whole bunch of people. And we shortchange our clients, which is all of us. At any given time, you're going to be in the system.
And when you take a look at it, because you're absolutely right, we have a shortage of providers that are currently working in the field. Many of our longer standing licensed individuals have found or tried to find other locations that they could go work, that they not on the truck every day or higher pay. Many of them are actually going into the hospitals today because of the nursing shortage they're experiencing. They're finding it quick and easy to replace with paramedics that could do a lot of the same stuff. So we kind of create a build that they will come mentality. However, on the backside, the average lifespan in our area, at least, and from my conversations around in EMS, is about 3 years for an EMT, and then they move on.
Yeah, so they usually go through one licensure period. That's the average. And then there's psychotic folks like us that stay down a lot longer. But and then the other thing I'd like to address is the squeeze on program directors. So you guys have been doing this for a long time, and boy, it's just so tough because you've got the kids who want it easy. They don't want to have to study. They don't want to have to learn. They don't even know how to read a textbook. They've been read to through either straight up or PowerPoint. And so they've been taught they don't have to read their textbook. It'll be read to them with a PowerPoint presentation. They don't know how to study. They don't really know how to learn. And then they whine if they don't get A's, because A is average. How come I didn't get an A? Well, because you didn't get one. You earned a C. Congratulations. Oh, I never get C's. Well, why? You do now. But then I'm going to get my mommy to call you. You're an adult. I don't talk to mothers. Well, you will now, because they're going to contact the president of the college, and the president of the college is going to be talking to you, and you're now going to give them a good grade because that's what they want. Jeez, how did that happen?
It's funny. You're describing a shining example of the Dunning-Kruger effect. And if you don't know what that is, you should Google that. I'm not going to tell you what it is because I can do a PowerPoint. I don't want to, because I'm with you. Death by PowerPoint is a real and present danger.
Yes. Hey, you're teaching kids not to read. What the smart ones say, okay, they read the first chapter, and then you did the PowerPoint and read the first chapter to them. They say, okay, I don't need to do that anymore. The dumb ones read maybe 2 or 3 chapters before they caught on. So you've got that issue. Then you've got your deans and whatnot, due to the financial squeeze, saying, hey, I need you to do more for less. And EMS, we're heavy in equipment. We're heavy in manpower. I can put 500 humanity kids in a classroom lecture, charge them the same tuition that you are, but I'm only paying one instructor who maybe isn't even there anymore. I remember my chemistry teacher was dead at college. He had died the year before. We just listened to his tapes. This is Dr. Hammer talking to you. So I've just caused psychotic events happen to anybody that went to Michigan State University between 74 and 78. But that was how he taught. But you paid the same tuition. So those folks are saying, well, why do I have to pay so much in expenses for you all? You know, when I don't have to for the humanities department, I don't have to for the English department or the lit or any of the other departments. I mean, science, yeah, chemistry and physics, but even them, they figure out ways to charge lab fees and things of that nature. So you get the financial squeeze. You get instructors that it's tough to get them to come in. Your clinical instructors are a nightmare because you can't pay them. So you get what you get. So you have COA saying, well, these clinical instructors all have to be trained and they have to have gone through programs and they need to be doing all these things. Yet you don't have any money to train them. You don't have any money to pay them. You just get the luck of the draw of who's available on the truck that day oftentimes. And certainly in the hospitals, you get the luck of the draw. And then somehow we decided that 12 pediatric intubations were something you needed to have for your paramedic program. Yet if you're in New Mexico, if you're in California, pediatric intubations are illegal. Well, how did pediatric intubations end up being illegal for a paramedic? Well, because we couldn't do them well. Well, why couldn't we do them well? Because we couldn't offer them opportunities to train on it. Well, why don't we offer them opportunities to train on it? Well, we don't do them well. Well, of course we don't do them well. We don't train on them well. Well, let's train on them better. So it's just a vicious circle, but you still have COA saying, well, you got to get 12 of them. And you got to get 4 neonatal resuscitations with complications. Right. How is that going to happen in the field? No licensed paramedic is going to let this new student do this. And certainly they're not going to let that happen in the hospital. So these are always going to be simulations. So we've set up these rules that says this is what you got to do. But it's kind of, there's no way you're going to be successful. So it'd be an interesting study to see how many people are actually pencil whipping most of this Appendix G stuff, where they're not really.
And you make a really good point. I had a conversation with President, it's been many years ago, with the American Society of Anesthesiologists, because they wrote a letter out to all the anesthesiologists who were within their group on behalf of the paramedic program because of COA, because the anesthesiology group sits on the COA board. There's a tie there, but anyways, ultimately it was like, hey, anesthesiologists, let paramedics into your programs, let them intubate and let them manage the airway, etc. This is something they need to do. And had a conversation with a couple of our local anesthesiology groups that run the operating rooms in our area, and they're like, we don't care what they say, you're not going to come in here.
That's right.
And it's like, because you don't need to be doing this. And I'm like, well, so is this I very much feel you there. And the only thing better than those two are labor and delivery. We've got to deliver babies, and trying to get into labor and delivery rooms are even more interesting.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, and then once you get out, okay, so you've gotten to do all this stuff. You've learned all these things. I did not know what a nephron was when I took my paramedic program. I did not know normal glomerular filtration rates. That was not something that was discussed in Nancy Caroline's original books. Just wasn't there. These kids come out in theory knowing glomerular filtration rates and what they're supposed to be. They know what pyelonephritis is and so on. And we knew, wow, this person's really feverish. We should probably get rid of them. But yet when they get out on the streets, then it's all protocol driven. And we don't want you thinking. We don't want you learning. We just want you following protocol. Just do what you're told. So it's not complex. It's very basic and skilled, and check these boxes and deliver the patient and quit thinking. Well, you just told me I was supposed to think, and now you're telling me not to think. In Kent County, where I'm at, you have to call for permission to do a pediatric intubation. And they tell me there's no way you're ever going to get to do one. And you have to call for permission to do an adult intubation if the patient already has an iGel in place. So when you talk to the paramedics and teach an ACLS class, they haven't done an intubation in a year or two. Well, they probably are a tad nervous about doing intubations. And I asked them, well, what's the likelihood of you delivering them to the hospital? I take it that they replace the eye gel with an ET tube when they get to the hospital. They said, oh yeah, you can count on it. What's the likelihood of you getting to practice one then? They said, none at all. The docs aren't going to let you do it. Well, where's the relationship between the docs, the ED docs, and EMS? Again, when we started this beast many, many years ago, they taught your courses. You knew the docs. You hung with them. You went out for drinks after class. I know that's not appropriate anymore, but that's what you did. You were friends with them socially as well as academically. And now it seems that we've so siloed everybody that nobody really gets to work with anybody. And it's all about, I've got to keep up with all this paperwork and all these requirements. And we've lost sight of what we're supposed to be doing, which is training and educating people on how to take care of people. And in our case, in an emergency setting.
So Doug, as we, first off, again, thank you for your many years of dedicated service to the profession. I think you sent us off with a few good nuggets, but in a nutshell, what are the things that you want our new providers, our experienced providers, and our educators to know based off your history?
So a new provider, if you want a great education, direct your education. Don't let that don't let that instructor just show you PowerPoints. Ask why. Recall asking my instructor, how does a person die from a pulmonary embolism? I get how you can die from a herd of pulmonary emboli, but one little pulmonary embolism way off in the right distal lung, why should that make any difference? And they kind of struggled with that, and then they said saddle emboli. If you throw a clot and it ends up in the saddle where the right left pulmonary arteries branch, that okay. Well, now that made sense. You know, how come people in AFib don't die? Well, blood returns to the heart squeezes the atria, pushes down the ventricles shoot it out. Well, people in AFib, that atria isn't doing anything effectively. So they can't shoot that blood down the ventricles. Those ventricles should be shooting blanks. How come they're not dead? Well, gravity. No, gravity is not the answer. That can't be. You mean if they stand on their head, they die right then? Oh yeah, no, they don't. Why? Ask why. Force your instructors to give you good answers. Fill your minds. Don't pass your test. Fill your minds. Because if you fill your mind, if you learn this stuff, you will pass the test. If you know how to do it, you will pass the test, and you'll find them to be somewhat less than challenging. And the more challenging they are, the better you'll actually like it. Because life is a whole lot more challenging than those tests. Learn all you can learn and keep learning. Don't think when you're done, because you're far from done. Keep asking. And instructors, encourage that behavior in students. Teach them how to learn. Teach them to value learning. The 3 before me rule is a great rule. Student says, well, what's the answer to this? Hi, I'm not your answer person. Check that book, check that resource, go online. If you still can't do it, then you come to me. But that 3 before me, let's teach them to teach themselves, because that's what they're going to have to do once they're out of your classroom. So facilitate their learning. Don't be the textbook. Absolutely
love it, sir. Thank you very much for coming on tonight. And again, thank you for your many years of dedicated service to the EMS profession. If individuals wanted to send you a message for all that you've done, where would they get in touch with you, Doug?
Well, they can certainly send it to Platinum Educational Group, and they'll forward it on to me. If they need help, reach out. I think my current 1096 number, which everybody got a kick out of because that was a 10 code for crazy in Michigan. So people thought I'd done that intentionally, or if not, at least it was appropriate. That number will work for another month. That'll go forward calls. But if you want to reach out, but just do it through Platinum and they'll forward it to me. I'm going to enjoy my retirement.
Well, sir, you've definitely earned it. So, last, we'll, thank you for coming on. Thank you for everything you've done, and hope everything remains stellar for your life in retirement. And you can just sit back and watch the growth in the profession over the next decades.
Yeah, everything's a pendulum. So hopefully it'll start swinging in the other direction, and it'll be awesome. We'll develop a great career ladder. And 20, 30 years from now, as I'm at the end of my lifespan and that I'm taking that last ride, it'll be so cool to have that awesome paramedic there, or paramedic practitioner.
Excellent, sir. So for all of our listeners tonight, you've heard how to get a hold of him. Reach out to him through Platinum Education. He has brought his wisdom from multiple years within this profession, being a provider, educator. Everything is great. So thank you, Doug. To our listeners, we always love to hear what you say about our podcast. So make sure to reach out to us on our website at emshandoff.com. You can also reach out to our Facebook and our Instagram pages, also on LinkedIn. Try to remain active in all of those locations. Make sure to go by our YouTube channel and hit the subscribe button so you get this very first every week as well. So for my co-host, take care, stay safe, and always remember the value of your EMS handoff.